So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Awaken to Purpose podcast. I have an amazing guest. I feel like I was stalking her and jocking her to come onto the podcast. We have Andrea Hipps today, LBSW. She is CDC Certified Divorce Coach who helps parents all along the divorce continuum resolve their divorce debris and create beautiful two-address families for their kids. She's the author of the international best-selling book, The Best Worst Time of Your Life, 4 Practices to Get You Through the Pain of Divorce, which outlines the 4 practices you need to create wholeness and healing for you and your kids before, during, and after the divorce. She's been featured on Fox, NBC, and ABC as an expert in divorce recovery. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so
Thank
excited
you.
you're here. Can you tell?
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here too. And I feel like I want to add to your story. It was love at first sight. I feel like for both of us, I was immediately drawn to everything that you're putting out into the world too. So I'm just really thrilled to be here today.
Yeah, and it's so love at first sight, right on Clubhouse. How can we see each other? But I was so drawn to you and the way that you spoke to all the folks who joined us on our divorce series. And I was like, Lord, can I reach out to her? And so I'm so excited to have you here today. And I would love for you to just kind of like jump right in and share your story and then talk to us a little bit about the work that you do with couples, with individuals around divorce recovery. And it could be, you know, anything. When I think about divorce recovery, I think about even people who at some point in their life, they were divorced and they remarried. So there's probably a lot that goes into it. So I'm just so excited to have you here today. And one of the things that I talked to you about was that for some reason, it must be just part of my ministry. A lot of the folks who I've had on as guests have experienced divorce. So I think this will be a great conversation for us to have and also to hear your story. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Well, and as the title of your podcast, you know, Awakening to Your Purpose, I think it's a real surprise to most people that they have a purpose that also includes the story of their divorce. I think in some ways we think immediately divorce is not the purpose, but I feel like there's always this continual surprise of actually the story of breaking and remaking, as I refer to it, is always really a dark but beautiful thing to report on. And so, yeah, my divorce experience started about a decade ago when my husband decided that this was not going to be something that was going to work for him going forward. And I was honestly completely thrown off. I was extremely crushed. I was frightened in areas I didn't even know that I could have fear. And I was just panicked about my future. I was panicked about my kids' future. I was panicked about my future with him. And so what that started 10 years ago was a journey to try to figure out, how can I make this beautiful? And I know that's not really the first place most people start when they're going through a divorce, but I was very convinced that I was either going to have a great marriage or I was going to have a great divorce, and I was not going to have a crummy one of either. And
Wow.
so my pursuit of that through the inevitable, and I'm sure you went through it too, complete exhaustion, fatigue, anger, rage, resentment, bitterness, everything was, how can I ultimately get to a place in the future that looks like me attending the wedding of our kids with their dad in a way that is comfortable, free, and beautiful. And that's where I started. I was like, that's the place I want to be. And I knew that even in the breaking, that's where I wanted to be. I had absolutely zero clue how I was going to get there. No clue at all.
Can I ask a question about that? So like, was it an announcement that your ex-husband just like he came home one day and said, you know what, I don't want to do this? Like what led up to that from your perspective? Because sometimes we don't always know. Sometimes we just have to guess if we just don't get the answers that we might have looked for at some point. So what led up to that point for you?
Well, that's an interesting question because he and I got counsel early on in our breaking that advised us to only talk about the parts of our divorce for which we experience our own sense of regret. And so I never tell his side of the story. I only
Okay.
tell my own. In fact, I just have a book coming out called The Best Worst Time of Your Life, 4 Practices to Get You Through the Pain of Divorce. And I never tell his story in that book. He tells his part of the story in it. But I would say the things that led
Ooh.
up to it, yeah, I gave him that opportunity to speak to that. But I feel like the things that led up to it for us were everything and nothing, which I think is true for a lot of people, that there wasn't
Yes. Yes.
there wasn't a blow up event, there wasn't a catastrophe or a massive betrayal it was just, somebody said at one point, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like, it's just, there was an experience for him of disconnect. And I didn't share in that, but I had to honor that was what he was going through. And the efforts that we were both able to put toward it didn't result in our marriage coming back together. And it's a sadness to both of us still at this point, because of the impacts that it had on so many people, not including ourselves, but including our children and our families and our community. And so that sort of inability to pinpoint something, I think, can really hang people up. That, like, it would be easier if it was a direct, if it was abuse, if it was a betrayal, if it were just something that you can point at. And I think for most of the people that I work with, it's not a something, it's a generalized everything.
Yes, yes. And I think, I think sometimes people are looking for that catalyst, that one thing that pushed the relationship over the edge to the point where someone says, I don't want to do this anymore. And oftentimes it's an accumulation of things that happen during the course of any type of relationship. And so when people may ask you, like, well, what happened? I know for me anyway, I would say, I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
I really don't, because it wasn't something that I wanted. So I love the fact that you are saying that you never tell his side of the story. You're really focusing on, kind of like your side, what you went through, what you experienced, and, the journey of the divorce and how you came out to the other side, and now how you're helping other people.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the missing pieces in our divorce recovery language in our country is we're not willing to own our own part. And when we don't own our own part, we really put ourselves as judge and jury to blame everyone and everything outside of us that led us to this point. Even if it was a divorce you didn't choose, like in my situation, there are still very specific ways that I unfortunately contributed to the dissolution of my marriage. And to fail to own those, even though I might think, oh, those are forgivable, oh, those shouldn't have led to a divorce, I have to own that I not only had delivered things in my being to another person that hurt them, even if I didn't intend to hurt them. I have to own that what I did had an impact on somebody else that led to this point for them. And that is, I think, undersaid and underdone in our divorce culture, which then just leads us to compromised relationships on the back end. When you can't own your part, you start weaving an incomplete story for your kids, for your future partner that you're going to have, and we get stuck in these narratives.
I think also we take on sometimes the role of the victim, right? So that we were in somehow, some way victimized by the other person. And I'm not saying that that's like not okay, because some people have to start there in order for them to go through their healing process. But I know for me anyway, I felt like it was all my fault. And I could have been a part of it just being the victim, like me taking everything on, taking ownership of it was my fault why he left. I was such a, an incomplete person, a broken person, and things like that. That's just kind of like a different story. But I totally agree. I have some folks in my life who have been divorced for more than a decade. But when you speak to them, it seems like they are actually just going through it at that point in time, like it just happened. Because there's still anger there, there's still bitterness, and then there's still the lack of awareness around the role that they played in the demise of it. So yes, I love that.
Yeah, there's a line in my book that says they start out stuck and they end up stunted. And I think that does happen to a lot of people that aren't willing to sort of march the path toward healing. And when you talk about being a victim, I think there's a very natural starting place and really a given that at some point you feel like this happened to me, I didn't make it happen. And part of the reason we do that, I think, is part of our sort of tribal impulse of wanting to make sure that our community stays with us. as we go through this. And if you're the perpetrator and you made this mess, you may have friends want to drop off and not stand by you. And you may have family members that don't support you. And so when we put ourselves in that victim role, it brings about and engenders this sympathy and empathy and, just pity on you, to where you then feel safer that you're not going to be left alone out there in the world. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. First of all, that was so good. I just want to pin that right there, because the idea of self-pity, one could argue that is idolatry, right? So everything becomes about you, me, poor me, and less about like, Lord, help me, show me, teach me, deliver me, right? And so, yeah, I totally get that. And I must say, it was a mental battle for me to not feel sorry for myself, because I felt like I had failed in my marriage, and that there was something fundamentally wrong with me, right? And so then everything became, it was a different way, it was a different form of self-pity, but it was still self-pity, right? So I totally take ownership of that. And I talk about that too in my book, where, my book is really about, coming to know God in these different seasons in the context of my divorce. And I know some people who have read my book, they were like, tell me some more of what happened. And I said, well, it wasn't supposed to be about what happened in the marriage. It was really supposed to be about the things that God started showing me about myself and how much I worshiped my ex-husband, everything about him, and how I had a spirit of entitlement. And so like, there is a beauty of really allowing God to come in, because there's things that he will show you about yourself that you don't always see about yourself. So
yeah, I would say going through divorce consciously the way it sounds like you did is a master's degree in self-growth. and really, if you're connected to God, it's a seminary degree too, because to me, divorce on the front end seems like a place God wouldn't go. He wouldn't inhabit any space in that, right? It's broken, it's dark, it's unwanted, it's just unlovely in all of these ways. And I'm sure the number of people you talk to, and I've heard them experiencing the kind of light that happens in that dark place, is really nothing short of a miracle. And my own story, as it intersects with what you were talking about and where you were being pulled to by God, was really this insistence I felt from God that love gets bigger all the time, including, and divorce is not exempt from that. And so how could I be a person who let God make my concept of love bigger? And so one of the ways that happened was when my husband had a girlfriend and brought in a new person to our family, and my hands went up. No way are we doing this. Not with her, not like this. I cannot open my heart or my life to this sense of competition and of threat and of unknown. And I had a very clear sense that God was always asking me, where can you make love bigger? And so that included in my relationship with her. And that was a difficult stretch for me. I did not want to go there. I was real happy to keep love small. I wanted love to stay right here in my hands, and it was only supposed to be these people. But time and time again, I've been invited to open myself to the action of God, which is always elbowing its way, I think, into the places that we'd rather stay dark and have our self-pity and be small. And so my story, I do feel like and my story today still is driven by, there is more love somewhere. How do we keep on till we find it? And how can divorce be a part of that?
I, first of all, loved everything that you just said about loving bigger, because I think that was one of the things that God revealed to me about myself, which was my definition of love was distorted. So if it doesn't line up with what he says in his word, then therefore it is not love. It's a love that we've adopted by way of culture oftentimes. When you feel this way, that's love. It's supposed to look this way, it's love. But no, the Bible is clear that love is patient and is kind. It is long suffering. It doesn't keep a record of wrongdoing. How many times have we had a checklist in relationships and we're like, okay, because 3 years ago you did this thing. That's keeping
So
the
true.
record, right? I mean, and then we feel like when we get our feelings hurt, that it gives us a license to be unkind. God is like, no, that's not how you love. And so when you talk about this idea of bigger and the enormity of it all, like, yes, as a believer, God is always trying to stretch us to grow, and realign the way that we see life and our definition of it with his word. So I love what you were just saying. That was so on point.
Well, thank you. And I saw a spiritual director early on in my divorce experience, and she
Mhm.
was so terribly helpful to me. And one of the things she said to me at the beginning was, what would it look like for you to want deep peace and freedom for your husband, no matter what that means for you?
Mm.
And that hit me like a gut. I mean, that was a gut punch of, no, I want deep peace and freedom for me. If he gets some, that's great, but then I'm not going there. I want commitment and obedience and staying here. And
Mhm.
it was a really interesting invitation that she laid out. And I said, I'd love to go to this place that you've sort of drawn, but I have no clue how to get there. And she
Yes.
challenged me at that time to do 3 gratitudes for my husband. As we're going through the divorce, 3 gratitudes every morning for him before I got out of bed, and no repeats. And that practice alone, I credit to the very enjoyable relationship that I have with him today, because
Mm.
it shifted. The natural course of events in divorce, is toward negativity, and it's toward critique, and it's
Yes.
toward sour. And what that practice did was put a huge spotlight on his assets and on what we needed to be working with as we moved forward instead of against. And I think most people are just so quick to identify what's not working. And what does that get you more of? More of what's not working. Instead,
Mhm.
this practice really shifted me into, here's the stuff I know I can count on him for. Let's go there.
Yeah.
Instead of, here's all the stuff that he can't do and won't do. And goodness, everybody pity me and I got the saddest life ever.
Oh my gosh. So whatever we meditate on has the potential to grow, right? You
Yes.
can
Yeah.
meditate on your fears, you can meditate on the negativity, and those things will start to grow to the point where it'll overflow to your kids. And
Yeah.
I think, as a mom, we have responsibilities to our kids. So one of the things I know for me anyway, the Lord told me was not to say anything negative about
Mm-hmm.
my ex-husband to my kids. And
Yes.
I did not. And boy, I tell you, when you talk about crucifying the flesh, Jesus. I mean, because there were moments when I wanted to shout and say some like awful things,
Oh,
some
yeah.
negative things, but I didn't. And so I really believe that the Lord was holding my tongue. And it was causing me to grow, right? So one of the things that, the Bible talks about is spiritual maturity. If you if you come out of the divorce and you haven't really grown as a person, then you probably haven't matured. So if you haven't let some things go, if you haven't let the person out of the pain that you feel like they may have caused you, then you haven't really grown, right? If you're taking
Right.
that pain and you're transferring it into another relationship, because that's what oftentimes we do, and then those triggers start to happen, then the likelihood is that you haven't grown in the right way. And so it's just really interesting. So I love that. Yeah, yeah. So I love like the 3 things. I would have been challenged, I must say. And you can't, not by the positive things. So I can say some positive things, but don't repeat them. Like, right. So it would have been a stretch because I probably would have been in repeat mode for the first couple of weeks. Like I
Oh,
can there's 3 things.
yeah, no, I have said before, mine were extremely pathetic at the beginning. I mean, I think the first one was, I'm glad he's not here. I mean, we didn't start at the top of the mountain, I mean, there was some very low roads on the way to the high road. So I don't want to
Mhm,
pretend that it was
mhm.
anything but that, but just this idea of, in order to get to this place where I enjoy the potential weddings of our children, I have to like this person.
Mm,
Now, when you're going through a divorce, liking someone is not on your list of to-dos. You hate
right.
them. You do. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's ugly. It's really dark. I mean, I have clients that talk about it would just be easier if they died. I wish they would just fall off a cliff. I mean, there is some
Yeah.
dark emotion that comes up, and it scares people that
Mm-hmm.
they feel this way. And yet, like what you said, what we focus on expands. How do we start to shift that? Not because the other person deserves it. They're never going to deserve your goodwill. You do it because you deserve to be beautiful, and you are beautiful when you're able to give things away, like praise. And so in our house, even though our kids live in a 2-address family, my address and his address, he's in
Mm-hmm.
our home. And I don't mean physically, although he does come by physically. He is a person in our home, even when he's not there. And so when there's good news,
Mm-hmm.
hey, dad's going to be so jazzed about that. Are you going to let him know, or should I? Hey, that is an awesome thing to talk to dad about because he's great at this. How do I
Mm-hmm.
keep pulling out his strengths and what he can offer as a compliment to me so that my kids see me championing him as well, which allows them to live more comfortably in our 2-address family. In fact, last night I was just watching the Gilmore Girls with my youngest, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a scene in there. I think we're in like season 5 or 6, where Emily, the mom's, is talking to Lorelai's boyfriend, and he had been divorced, and she said, oh, and divorce just ruins the kids. And my daughter piped up and she's like, what? No, it doesn't. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, just to hear that immediate reaction from her, to know that this hard work of creating a differently shaped family where she can feel free to love both of us was
Mm-hmm.
really, it was really taking root in her, in that reaction. That made me really proud.
That I love that because I think sometimes what happens is that kids feel like they're forced to choose,
Oh yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So, and they're going to side with the one oftentimes who's either the most broken, and sometimes they might side with the other one where they just feel like, okay, well, they still have their stuff together and you're completely
Right.
falling apart,
Yeah.
right? And so they should never be placed in the middle of that. And I'm a firm believer, people will make up their mind. So, whatever it
Mhm.
is about the person, they will see that eventually. And they have to feel like they can navigate that for themselves. So, I think for me anyway, I got to a point where I was not trying to manage two households, right? His
Mhm.
and mine.
Yes.
And so whatever happened at his house happened at his house. If they chose to share with me, I was okay,
Mhm.
but I never asked. I would
Mhm.
just say like, "How was your weekend?" or "How was your week?" Right? That was it. And if they said it was great, I would let it go at that. If they shared something that was just like, "Oh, well, this happened," and I would say, "Yeah, what do you think about that?" Right? So I'm not going to, and I did not interject at that particular point in time because I was thinking like I don't want to take responsibility for what's happening. I don't want to try to discipline my kids if they're doing something they should be doing because they have a father and he knows how to parent. And so it gave me so much peace and freedom to just let it go and whatever was happening. And sometimes it felt like my kids were trying to cry out for help, like, Mom, help me with this. But I was always asking them, well, what do you think you can do?
Right.
What type of conversation you think you can have with dad, like, right? So it was just like taking me out of it, because
Mhm.
I think one of the things that we try to do is micromanage,
Oh yeah.
oftentimes what is happening in our house and then someone else's house. And I just said I was giving myself permission to not do that.
Everything you just said there is true wisdom. True wisdom. The measure of needing to become an adult who allows another adult to be who they're going to be anyway is the
Mhm,
simplest truth and the hardest to live. And what you just described there is really true freedom. And it's the
mhm,
kind of parenting that we're being called to in divorce that many people aren't opening themselves to because they're so insistent on this idea of co-parenting. And I think the idea of co-parenting has gotten really warped, where we think it's supposed to be this besties and we're braiding each other's hair and we tell each other everything and we're totally on the same page. No,
mhm,
that's not realistic for most American divorced families. What it is I'm going to give my absolute best to the experience of
mhm,
parenting these kids when they're with us. You're going
mhm.
to do the same. Your best might be 70% of what mine is, and that's your best, and I'm going to leave
Yeah.
you to it. And what you said about when your kids come back and or when they're calling you and looking for a rescue, how we empathize with them without commiserating with them is the
Mm-hmm.
art of a beautiful co-parent, where you say, I get it. I get that dad's distracted. That must be really hard. What's your next step?
Right.
Instead of going, oh, he was always so distracted when we were together. I totally get that. That's
Yeah.
commiserating, right? Empathy says,
Yes.
I care for what you're going through, and I'm here to let you know that I will help you figure out the next step, but I can't take it for you. I
And
love everything you were just saying.
thank you. And I must say, I can't take credit for anything I said or anything that I did. I can tell you right now, God was right in the center of everything, really leading me and instructing me, right? So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I think that we lose sight of when you look throughout the Bible, God is a God of strategy. He will always give you a strategy if you ask, right? And I needed
Mm-hmm.
that. I didn't know how to
Mm-hmm.
be divorced, right? I
Right.
didn't. First of all, let me just say, I didn't know how to be married. I thought I did, right? Let's just be honest and let's be real, right? So sometimes you have a role model and it's not the best model that you might see that's out there. And so then you enter into these relationships and you fall into these roles that you've seen growing up. Right. So that could be on TV, that could be in your
Yeah.
house, in somebody else's house, but it doesn't mean, and you think, okay, if I duplicate these things, then therefore I will probably have this type of long lasting marriage, relationship, etc. And so, but you don't really know how to act or behave in a marriage. And if you don't know how to act and behave in a marriage, you certainly don't know how to behave once you're outside the context of that marriage.
Right.
And so sometimes it's just the worst in us start to come out. And so that's why I say I can't take credit, because in the natural, that's not me. That's
Right.
not who I am to just say, like, I'm going to step back. No, I'm always up right in the middle of it. I always have an
Mm-hmm.
opinion and a thought about something. And so, like, during that whole time, God was really teaching me, how to be the best version of myself that I could
Mm-hmm.
be at that particular point in time. And I had to let go of the way in which I was raised. I had to let go of the, certain patterns of thoughts that I used to have. And God was like, do it my way. And I
Behold,
did.
there's a new thing. That's
Yes,
I feel that
right.
was crying out to you.
And so I think that's really, so I can never take credit. So when people are saying that to me, I will say in a heartbeat, no, not me, but him, right? It was nothing but God working through me. But I was really obedient and I was so desperate because I didn't want to experience all the pain and the hell that I was in.
Mm-hmm.
And if God was the solution, then I followed what he said to do, even though it was unnatural.
Mm-hmm.
And even though other people gave me different type of advice. So like
Yes, yes. And I feel like what you're touching on is this idea of surrender, which really comes down to a willingness that am I willing to live well in a life I didn't expect?
mm,
Because what happens for those people, right, who keep going, who you talk to them 10 years out and they're still talking about their divorce, they're not willing to be open to the fact that their life could be beautiful, even though it doesn't look like what they expected. And while God was acting, you were putting yourself in a position to be acted upon. And I think a lot of people aren't able to do that. So I really want to honor that you put yourself in a place to be broken, but also to be remade in a new way, and in a way that blesses not only yourself, but your former partner and obviously your kids.
mm. Yeah, and it was a position of praise, I think is what I
Mm-hmm.
took.
Yeah.
It was a position of humility because I just didn't know. And I think sometimes we always feel like we have to know and we
Mm-hmm.
don't really know. And so then
Mm-hmm.
we start acting it out based on, again, all these things that we were raised to believe, to think. And then, you have the influence of social media, right? You had the emergence of all of these, I don't know, housewife shows. I haven't seen them. But in some of the clips, I saw the spirit of the clap back real strong. Like, this is what you say. You don't let people get away with talking to you this way. You're supposed to
Right.
be aggressive and drive in. And then God was like, no, that's not what you're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do. You're supposed to sit back and let me take charge. And then you just do these things like I tell you to do, and you will experience so much peace. And I can tell you that I had a season of not just so much pain and heartache, but again, I had so much debt that I was in, that I felt
Oh,
like I
sure.
was going to crumble. I did
Hmm.
not know what to do. I did not know how to be single. I didn't know how to be divorced.
Right.
And so all of these things, but can I tell you, I still had peace. I
Amazing.
don't know, like all this stuff was happening. I was being pursued by all these different creditors, IRS,
Yeah.
all these things. And I was like, Lord, I don't even have money to put gas in my car to take my kids to school. So I'm like, oh, we're
Right.
staying at home today. And they're like, yay. And I was like, yay, they don't know I don't have any money.
Oh
And
my.
so it's just the beauty of like when God talks about peace, it's his
Yeah.
peace, not the peace that we think about. So yeah.
Yeah. There is, when you're in those places, when you're doing things that seem so counter to what the world would have you do, where there really is it is the peace that passes understanding. Like there's no logic to the peace that you were offering or the peace that you were experiencing as a result to it, because like you said, our culture uh, elevates this idea of standing up for yourself. And
Mhm.
I think it's what you did was you did stand up for yourself, but in a way that didn't require other people to bow to you, but in a way that was, you know, service oriented and heart oriented, and really invited other people to move on to what was best for them too.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you get into this space of like coaching and this idea of divorce recovery?
Sure. Well, when I started going through my divorce and I had this bigger vision of where I wanted my life to end up, I feel like it started to attract people to me who are also on the same kind of a hunt. And so I
Mm-hmm.
started meeting with people informally to talk about sort of the double binds and the things you were going to have to face directly in order to get to this new space. And was always encouraged by people to either write a book or to go into helping people. And I kind of tucked that away for a while, and maybe a couple years ago or 3 years ago now started writing the book. I thought that'd be a great first step, just to sort of
Mm-hmm.
try to understand my own journey, which I'm sure was part of yours, and to be able to share sort of some tips and tricks that made sense to me along the way, and hopeful that those would help other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
really didn't think I would dive full time into the divorce coaching until after my kids left the house, because it seemed like it would take a lot of energy. But it just became more clear to me over time that I was postponing what was next, instead of taking that step of faith to really open myself to sharing the story that I have and the help that I want to give. And so I got certified as a divorce coach. I'm also a licensed social worker, so I have some background in that, and really started pouring myself into what kind of models and experiences will help people to get to this more mature place like you described in a lesser amount of time, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't think you can skip over the pain. I don't think there's a way to do divorce where you don't just really hit a rock bottom, but how you talk to yourself in that, and what kind of support you bring to yourself, and really having a destination in mind where you're reverse engineering yourself to it, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
is really, really vital for people. And so I've jumped in, and I have learned so much from my clients, and have been so impressed at how many people want to do this differently, want to
Mm-hmm.
bring a different spirit to what it means to have a relationship dissolve, and what it means to have children be in the crosshairs of that, and how do we elevate ourselves in order to raise the whole family up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So talk to us a little bit more about your book. I would love to hear a little bit more about the four practices and, just having kids. I don't think we think about that, two address homes, because that's
Yeah.
essentially what happens
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
context of a divorce. But yeah.
Yeah. I think when we think of our co-parenting situations, we think about our house and their house, and most people think their house is home,
Mm-hmm.
versus really getting into the minds and hearts of your children, who have two bedrooms and two addresses, and really two microcosms of worlds that they have to adapt to as they go back and forth, right? Because even in the best of situations, you cannot mirror each other's home environments. There's different foods and different customs and different
Yes.
visitors and different schedules and different everything, even in the best of situations. And so part of what my book is doing is introducing some practices that will help you be the chief narrator of that 2-address family story for your kids. And so we don't
Yes.
want to lead with, we messed up, this got screwed up, this is kind of what we're stuck with, but more, this is what happens when adults reach these situations. And I'm now going to give you a living, breathing example of what it means to handle conflict and maturity and moving on well, really as a lesson to our kids and what could be, instead of a lesson to our kids and failure and disappointment. And so the practices, I've always felt like when I was going through my divorce, and I'll tell you, I read just about everything that was ever printed about pain during that time. And I still do. I'm still drawn to that, to the sort of how we deal with our darker emotions. But I always felt like nobody was speaking to that complete terrorizing destruction of your life and heart and soul that happens when you really face the fact that you're getting divorced. I felt like there was a lot of logistics books, and there were a lot of, you know, let's level up books, but there wasn't really anybody talking about, what do I do with all this pain? How do I start to talk to it and shape it in ways that will help serve my life going forward, instead of just, you know, getting stunted and becoming a person who lives my next life from the unresolved place of these emotions. And so,
Love that.
Yeah. So the first practice is really to rise above. And that practice is, you know, also known as staying classy or whatever that is. We tell people to do that, right? In divorce, like, take the high road, stay classy, rise above, be the bigger person. That's really awesome, except when you're getting a divorce, and that's impossible to do. And so I really walk through the steps.
Classy goes out the window.
Classy does not have a home at your address anymore.
Yeah, you may not even want to comb your hair. Let's just be honest. You may not want to get out of your bed. So then you're like, how do I juxtapose this idea of, you know, being classy and I'm depressed, right? So I love that. Okay.
Yes. So each chapter ends with what I call questions for your deepening, because while I can't talk to everyone individually, I surely want to. And I do feel like in order to really grow and mature, as you said, in your divorce, you have got to put pen to paper. You have got to put time into reflecting on yourself and your situation. And so each chapter and each practice sort of ends with, how do you take it and start to construct something new in your own life? And it's really not just for people who are going through divorce, but in those people who are in the 5 and 10 years out, who are really like, why is this still circulating for me? Why can I not let this go? The practices are really designed to help you let it go. And to let it go, you have to get in it some more. And I think that's the hard part. People are like, I'm over it. I've forgiven him. I've forgiven her. I'm over it. We're good. And then you hear them talk, and they've got daggers they can throw across town. So you can't just force a forgiveness and force a I'm over it on it, and everybody believe you when you yourself probably don't even believe you. This is about really getting to the heart of deep peace and freedom for yourself. And what it takes to do that is going to be some stuff you probably haven't experimented with yet.
Okay, so first of all, yes, and yes, all of that, because I think part of it is when we're going through what we're going through, people just want a resolution. Like, help me, help me to figure out how to pull myself out of this rut that I'm in. That's so funny. I think in some ways our books seem to complement one another.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, mine is really about like allowing God to transform the pain that you're in into his purpose for your life, whatever that might look like. And I think in my book, I use the Bible as like a theoretical framework to kind of like, here are these different scriptures, here are all these life lessons that you can apply. So there's so much support that is out there for folks. And I just pray that people really, take advantage of all the like gems that you have to offer in your book. And we're going to get to the point where I'm going to ask people or ask you where people can find you. But I do want to kind of like close this and get to these little questions that I have, little big questions that I have that I love to ask all my guests. So the first is, from your story, what life lessons have you learned about God's purpose for your life?
That under no circumstances has his purpose for my life been my purpose for my life at the outset.
Okay, first of all, I'm about to flip out of this chair. Mainly because, okay, that was so good. And I'm gonna tell you why. Because I was just talking to my best friend about this, and I said, I
Yeah.
think that the word purpose has become so popular in our culture right now. So everybody's like,
Yeah.
walking in purpose, I'm walking in purpose. But the Bible is clear. It is God's purpose for your life, not some type of arbitrary purpose that you've made up for yourself, but really
Hmm.
about his purpose and what he's trying to do, and his purpose shall prevail in the earth. So thank you, Jesus, for saying that through you.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And what advice would you offer listeners on awakening to God's purpose for their lives?
I would think that one of the indicators of what's next for people is the thing you are most resisting. And it's not going to be true in every case, right? But
Mhm.
like if you're resisting that glass of wine every night, go ahead and resist it. But I think like when you think about some of those bigger concepts of what would it look like for me to bring more love into this situation, or I'm thinking about going in this direction, but I'm not sure. If you're a no on it, flirt with a yes,
Mhm. Mhm.
and
Yeah.
really open yourself to it, because I think when we put our hand, we can only grow as far as our yes, and so
Mhm.
where your life is saying no, can you invite God to start speaking into what it would look like to have a yes there, and if for nothing else, just for equal airtime of making great decisions, we have
Mhm.
to give voice to that.
I firmly believe, and when you look at a lot of scriptures in the Bible, God's purpose is never about your comfort. You're going to feel uncomfortable. So whatever that thing
Right.
is that you are uncomfortable about, so it could be like, I don't want to forgive.
Right. Yes.
But it's really clear that God is calling us to forgive. So that is a good indication of the thing that you might be struggling with, the thing that you are most uncomfortable with, is getting to the point of saying, not by my will, but by yours. So saying yes to God. So I love that you are just, I mean, if people could see what I'm doing, all the expressions that I'm making every time you say something, like I have to put this on YouTube. I mean, it's just like, okay, I'm about to flip out this chair. Okay, so what what does it mean to become God's best version of you?
I think instinctively we have a best self in us, and
Mm-hmm.
that best self is indicated to us when we are most at peace.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about having this tremendous sense of well-being, what what are we in that? When you're sitting
Mm-hmm.
by a lake, or you're watching a sunset, or you've got your family in your arms, what is it that you're bringing to those situations that allows something really otherworldly in you to rise up? That's
Mm-hmm.
the thing that's been placed in you to give away and make bigger. And to me, that's the art of living from your best self, is not only to want to do that, but to know specifically, I'm at my best when I'm doing this, and I want to do more of it for others.
I love it. I love it. Okay. What do you know about God that you wish the whole world knew about him?
I think it comes back to what we touched on earlier, which is that love is always getting bigger, and your experience of love right now is so small. You have no
Mm-hmm.
idea how small your love is, and the invitation that God holds out to us is always to be on a hunt for, could there be more love introduced into this situation, and to this person, and to this reality, and to really be a person who opens yourself to be a vessel of being the bearer of that love.
So, so good. Okay, so good. Okay, so first of all, where can people find you if they're looking for you and they want to
Sure.
work with you? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a website. It's my name, Andrea Hipps, divorcecoach.com. There's two P's in Hips. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, all under Andrea Hipps Divorce Coach. I have a weekly email that I put out. I'd love for people to subscribe to that. You can do that from my website. I also have a free communication guide for talking with a difficult partner. You can get that on my website. And I really just each week kind of focus in on a theme of something, and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of fills out my social media for the week. So just grab on a Monday, and hang on for different ways to shape your soul, to shape your connection to yourself, your connection to your former partner, and to your kids, that's my biggest hope. And then, like you said, the book is coming out. It's on pre-order right now until April 30th. April 30th, it's going to be delivered to your Kindle, or on April 30th, you can order a paperback if you prefer to have paper like I do. It's on Amazon, and it's called The Best Worst Time of Your Life, 4 Practices to Get You Through the Pain of Divorce. And I really hope that it will be a blessing to people who are really struggling with, what do I do with all this big stuff inside of me?
Yes, and I will be ordering my copy on my Kindle because I love reading from my phone. So I'm super excited about it. And at some point, we have to have you come back after I've read the book.
For sure.
And so we can talk a little bit more about that. That would be so exciting for me, and I think for other people as well.
And I'll get yours, and we'll interview you as well.
Oh, hello now. Yes.
Now we got a series.
Bring in somebody to interview both of us about the books and the segment.
There you go.
But again, I just want to say thank you so much. And I'm so honored, so incredibly honored that you said yes to come onto the podcast. I just feel like you've blessed my life tremendously. I pray that you will bless others who will hear this at whatever point in time that they choose to listen to this. And I just can't thank you enough. I know that it was God inspired, God ordained, and I just appreciate your willingness to be so open and to share so many of the practices that have helped you become the best version of yourself.
Thank you. It was really, really dear to be here, but even more dear to just encounter you out there in the world in such a unexpected way. And I just feel super blessed to know you and to be a part of this good mission that you're on with your podcast to help people really wake up to what's next and say yes to it. So thank you for the opportunity.
Beautiful.